Sister-in-law turns professional stalker. My sister-in-law Jen had apparently decided to launch her own personal investigation unit. I came home to find out that my family had basically turned into a crime-solving team without telling me. Jen had taken it upon herself to figure out exactly what was going on, and her methods were both impressive and slightly terrifying. She started by doing what any reasonable person would do when they suspect a brother-in-law's wife is cheating. She began following my wife around like some kind of discount private investigator. The dedication was honestly remarkable. Jen had apparently cleared her schedule to become a full-time surveillance specialist, and she was taking this more seriously than actual detectives intake actual cases. The funny thing about affairs is how they turned everyone in the family into amateur sleuths. Suddenly, every family member becomes convinced they need to gather evidence and solve the mystery. It's like Infidelity activates some kind of detective gene that makes ordinary people think they're qualified to conduct undercover operations. Jen had fully embraced this role and was treating it like her new career. She told me she'd been watching the house on days when I was supposed to be out of town. The mystery truck had become a regular fixture in my driveway, showing up with clockwork precision whenever my work schedule took me away. Jen documented his visits and discovered he had a wife and kids. The affair partner wasn't just some random single guy. He was married with a family. The revelation that this guy had his own wife and kids at home made the whole situation 10 times more complicated and 10 times more infuriating. My wife wasn't just betraying me. She was helping someone else betray their entire family. The collateral damage was expanding beyond what I'd even considered, and Jen was documenting all of it with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found their true calling. But Jen didn't stop at casual observation. She decided to follow this guy to see where he lived and what his situation was. The level of commitment was both admirable and slightly concerning. She spent entire afternoons trailing him through town, learning his routine, and basically becoming his unwanted shadow. The guy had no idea he was being stalked by someone's determined sister-in-law. During one of these surveillance missions, Jen discovered the apartment complex where he lived. She watched him go into a unit that clearly wasn't set up for a single person. There were family photos visible through the windows, kids' toys in the yard, and a woman who came home later that evening. Everything clicked into place about why he was so comfortable parking in my driveway like he owned the place. Jen's detective work reached its peak when she managed to get photographic evidence. She'd positioned herself strategically to capture my wife and her affair partner together, and the pictures were absolutely damning. Not subtle, not ambiguous, but clear proof that there was no innocent explanation for any of this. The photos showed them acting like a couple, completely comfortable and obviously familiar with each other. The evidence was so overwhelming that it left no room for doubt or denial. When Jen showed me these pictures, my mixed feelings about her unsolicited investigation suddenly became very clear. Part of me was grateful that someone cared enough to get involved and help me understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. Part of me was embarrassed that my personal crisis had become a family project. And part of me was impressed by her thoroughness and dedication to uncovering the truth. The awkward thing about having family members investigate your spouse is that it removes any last shred of privacy from an already humiliating situation. Jen knew details about my wife's affair that I didn't know. She'd spent more time observing my wife's behavior than I had, and she could tell me things about my own marriage that I'd been too trusting to notice. It was helpful and mortifying at the same time. But the photographic evidence was the final piece I needed to accept that there was no going back from this. Seeing my wife with another man in pictures made it impossible to maintain any hope that this was just a temporary mistake or a moment of poor judgment. The images showed two people who were clearly involved in something ongoing and serious. What struck me most about Jen's findings was how obvious everything had been to everyone except me. The affair partner's regular visits, the timing that coincided with my work trips, the way my wife's behavior had changed over the past few months. All the signs had been there for anyone who was paying attention, and apparently everyone had been paying attention except the person who should have been. The pictures also revealed how careless both of them had been about hiding their relationship. They were acting like they had nothing to worry about, like they were completely safe from discovery. The guy was parking in my driveway in broad daylight, and my wife was greeting him at the front door like they were an established couple. The lack of concern about getting caught was almost insulting. Looking at those photos, I realized that the confrontation I'd been avoiding was inevitable. There was no more room for doubt, no more hoping I was wrong, no more trying to find innocent explanations. Jen's amateur detective work had provided me with irrefutable proof that my marriage was over. The only question left was how I was going to handle ending it. The funny thing about cheaters is that they never realize how obvious they are to everyone around them. But even with all this evidence staring me in the face, I still wasn't ready to have that conversation. Apparently, my family had noticed my continued avoidance and decided I needed a different dinner party, except Sharon sprung a casual pasta dinner that turned into therapy. The setup was so obvious it was almost insulting, but I was too emotionally exhausted to put up much resistance to their amateur intervention tactics. I walked into that dinner expecting normal conversation about work and weekend plans, but instead found myself sitting across from a woman who was clearly trained to read people's emotional states like a roadmap. Sharon had this way of asking casual questions that weren't casual at all, and before I knew it, I was spilling details about my situation between bites of pasta. The whole thing felt like being ambushed by someone's therapeutic aunt who happened to have a psychology degree. The resistance I felt toward getting professional help was intense and completely irrational. Part of me kept insisting that I could figure this out on my own, that I didn't need some stranger analyzing my marriage problems and telling me what to do. Another part of me recognized that I was drowning in emotions and had no idea how to process any of what was happening. The internal conflict between wanting help and rejecting it was exhausting all by itself. After dinner, Sharon suggested we take her dog for a walk so we could talk more privately. The absurdity of having impromptu therapy while following a golden retriever around the neighborhood wasn't lost on me, but something about the informal setting made it easier to open up. There's something about walking that makes difficult conversations feel less confrontational. Like the movement gives your brain permission to process things differently. What surprised me most was how much I needed to talk to someone who wasn't emotionally invested in my situation. Sharon just listened without immediately jumping to conclusions or telling me what I should feel about everything. The neutrality was refreshing in a way I hadn't expected, and she forced me to face the inevitable conversation I'd been avoiding. I found myself telling her things I hadn't even admitted to myself yet. How I'd been noticing small changes in my wife's behavior for months, but convincing myself they didn't mean anything. How I'd been making excuses for her distance and distraction because facing the alternative was too scary. How part of me had known something was wrong long before I saw actual proof, but I'd been too afraid to investigate my own suspicions. She kept bringing the conversation back to the inevitable confrontation with my wife that I was desperately trying to avoid. Every time I'd start talking about other aspects of the situation, she'd redirect me to the fact that I needed to have an honest conversation about what I knew and what I wanted to happen next. The woman had laser focus when it came to cutting through avoidance tactics. Her advice was brutally simple and terrifying at the same time. She said, the longer I waited to confront my wife, the more difficult the conversation would become, and that clarity was essential for moving forward. The logic was sound, but the emotional reality of actually having that conversation felt impossible. I kept trying to find ways around it, alternative approaches that didn't involve direct confrontation. I suggested maybe I could just gather more evidence first, or maybe I could figure out a way to make her confess without having to bring up what I already knew. Sharon listened to all my elaborate schemes to avoid the hard conversation, and then gently pointed out that I was essentially trying to outsmart my own fear. The observation was accurate and slightly embarrassing. The comedy of my avoidance tactics became obvious when she started listing them back to me. I wanted to wait until I felt emotionally ready, except I'd never feel ready for that conversation. I wanted to have more information first, except I already had all the information I needed. I wanted to plan out exactly what to say, except no amount of planning would make the conversation less painful. She made me realize that I was treating the confrontation like some kind of performance that I needed to perfect instead of just an honest conversation between two people who used to love each other. The fear of not handling it perfectly was preventing me from handling it at all. I was so worried about saying the wrong thing that I wasn't saying anything, which was actually the worst possible approach. The emotional stakes of facing the truth felt overwhelming, but Sharon helped me understand that avoiding the truth wasn't making those stakes any lower. If anything, the longer I waited, the more complicated and painful everything became. The fear was growing instead of shrinking, and my confidence was disappearing instead of building up over time. She pointed out something that should have been obvious, but wasn't. People will do absolutely anything to avoid difficult conversations, even when avoiding them creates more problems than having them would. I was spending more energy trying not to confront my wife than it would take to actually confront her. The math didn't make sense, but the emotional logic felt completely reasonable. By the end of our walk, Sharon had made her position crystal clear. It was now or never. No more delays, no more excuses, no more elaborate plans to avoid the inevitable. The conversation needed to happen immediately before I could talk myself out of it again or find new reasons to postpone what had to be done. Her final piece of advice was that clarity comes from facing reality, not from trying to manage or control it. The truth about my marriage was already there, whether I acknowledged it or not. The only question was whether I was going to keep pretending or start dealing with what was actually happening. Walking back to my brother's house, I felt something I hadn't felt since finding that truck in my driveway. I felt like I had a plan that made sense, even if it was terrifying. But apparently my paranoid brain had other ideas about how this confrontation should go down. The great grocery store stakeout. Armed with Sharon's therapeutic wisdom and a plan that made sense, I drove home ready to have the conversation that would change everything. But first, my wife told me she was going to the grocery store. Such a simple, innocent statement that should have meant absolutely nothing. Except when trust is completely destroyed, even the most mundane activities become potential sources of deception. The rational part of my mind kept saying this was ridiculous. She's going to buy food. People do this every day. It's a normal human activity that doesn't require verification or investigation. But the paranoid part of my brain, the part that had been activated by finding naked strangers in my bedroom, was screaming that nothing she said could be trusted anymore. If she could lie about loving me while carrying on an affair, she could certainly lie about picking up milk and bread. I even trailed her to the grocery store because nothing felt safe anymore. The absurdity of conducting surveillance on my wife's shopping trip wasn't lost on me, but I couldn't trust anything she said. There was her car, exactly where it should be if she was actually buying groceries. Relief and embarrassment washed over me in equal measure. She was telling the truth about this one simple thing, which somehow made me feel worse. The fact that I needed visual confirmation of her grocery store visit highlighted just how completely broken our relationship had become. The irony was almost funny in a dark way. I didn't trust her about groceries after catching her cheating. The progression from discovering infidelity to verifying food shopping was so absurd it felt like something out of a comedy sketch. Except it wasn't funny when you were living it. It was just sad and pathetic and a perfect example of how betrayal turns you into someone you don't recognize. When she finally emerged from the store with actual grocery bags, I felt a mixture of relief and disgust with myself. She was buying groceries. She was telling the truth about this one insignificant thing. But the fact that I needed to verify it showed me just how far we'd fallen. Every future interaction would be filtered through suspicion and doubt. Every casual statement would be potential evidence of more deception. The drive home felt like a walk of shame. I just spent time conducting surveillance on my wife's shopping trip, and the only thing I'd accomplished was confirming that sometimes she actually does what she says she's going to do. The behavior was beneath me, beneath us, and beneath any relationship that had any hope of surviving. But that was the point. Our relationship didn't have any hope of surviving, and my grocery store stakeout was just more evidence of that reality. I got home before she did, and that's when I sent her the text that changed everything. I told her we needed to talk when she got back, and that she needed to be ready to be honest. The message was deliberately vague and ominous, designed to let her know that whatever conversation we were about to have was going to be different from all the others. The days of casual deception and comfortable lies were over. The cryptic nature of the text was intentional. I wanted her to have time to think about what honesty meant and what she might need to confess. I wanted her to wonder what I knew and how much trouble she was in. After weeks of her controlling the narrative through lies and misdirection, it was time for me to take back some control of the situation. Watching her read that text when she got home was interesting. The casual expression on her face shifted to something more concerned as she processed the message. She asked what I wanted to talk about, and I told her she'd find out soon enough. The power dynamic had shifted, and she could feel it. The grocery store verification. It had been ridiculous and degrading, but it had served a purpose. It showed me that trust wasn't something we could rebuild or repair. It was something that was completely gone, and without it, we had nothing left worth fighting for. The paranoia that had driven me to follow her to buy milk was the same paranoia that would poison every interaction we'd ever have again. But I was done being the suspicious husband who needed to verify grocery trips. I was done being the victim who discovered betrayal and then spent his time gathering more evidence of what he already knew. The conversation we were about to have would determine whether she was capable of honesty, and if she wasn't, then I already knew what came next. The text message had been sent, the stage was set, and my wife was about to find out that her husband was no longer the trusting man who believed whatever she told him. She was about to discover that some conversations can't be avoided forever, and this was one of them. The trickle-truth comedy show. When we sat down to have our conversation, my wife launched into what I now recognize as the classic cheater's playbook, the trickle-truth method, where they reveal information one tiny piece at a time, testing your reaction before deciding how much more they need to confess. It's like watching someone try to ease into a cold swimming pool, except the pool is made of lies and the water temperature is your marriage falling apart. She started with the most innocent possible explanation for everything I might have noticed. She'd been skipping yoga classes lately because she was feeling stressed and needed time to think. The yoga excuse was almost insulting in its simplicity, as if missing exercise classes was the biggest secret she'd been keeping from me. I sat there, listening to her explain her workout schedule, while knowing I'd seen her naked in bed with another man. The disconnect between what she was telling me and what I actually knew was so absurd it was almost funny. When I didn't seem satisfied with the yoga revelation, she moved on to phase 2 of her confession strategy. She admitted that instead of going to yoga, she'd been going out for drinks occasionally. Just casual drinks to decompress after work, nothing serious, just sitting at a bar by herself, thinking about life. The image she was painting was of a woman having some kind of mild midlife crisis that involved skipping exercise and having solitary cocktails. Each new piece of information was designed to seem like a big confession, while actually revealing nothing significant. She was controlling the narrative, deciding how much truth I could handle at each stage. The manipulation was so obvious once you recognized the pattern, but she was delivering each revelation like it was this huge admission that took tremendous courage to share. But then I mentioned the photo. The one I'd found in her deleted gallery, showing her with some stranger looking very comfortable and definitely not alone. Her face went through this interesting series of expressions as she tried to figure out how much I actually knew and how much she could still get away with hiding. The calculation was visible as she weighed her options for explaining away photographic evidence. Her explanation for the photo was so ridiculous it bordered on comedy. She said she'd been out having drinks and some guy had asked her to take a picture with him, and she'd agreed because she was being stupid. According to her version, this was just a random stranger who wanted a photo with her for no apparent reason, and she'd gone along with it because she wasn't thinking clearly. The story made no sense on any level, but she delivered it with complete conviction. The progression from yoga lies to drinking alone to mysterious photos was like watching someone slowly admit to increasingly serious crimes. Each confession was supposed to be the complete truth, but each one was immediately followed by evidence that there was more she wasn't telling me. The pattern became predictable. She confessed to something minor. I had pressed for more details, and she'd act shocked that I wasn't satisfied with her partial honesty. What frustrated me most was how she seemed to think she could control the amount of damage by controlling the flow of information. Like if she only admitted to small things gradually, the impact would be manageable and she could gauge my reactions before deciding whether to reveal more. She was treating our marriage like a negotiation where she got to decide which facts I was allowed to know. Every time I threatened to leave unless she told me everything, she'd suddenly remember one more detail she'd forgotten to mention. It was never the complete truth, just enough additional information to keep me from walking out the door. The manipulation was exhausting. She was making me work for every piece of honesty, forcing me to drag the truth out of her bit by bit instead of just telling me what had happened. The universal experience of being trickle-truth is something that anyone who's dealt with infidelity recognizes immediately. The gradual disclosure, the minimizing of each revelation, the acting like each small confession is this huge gesture of honesty. It's a playbook that cheaters seem to follow instinctively, probably because it gives them the illusion of maintaining some control over a situation where they've already lost all moral authority. After the third or fourth round of "that's everything, I swear," followed immediately by more confessions when I pressed harder, I realized what was happening. She was never going to voluntarily tell me the whole truth. She was going to keep feeding me information in tiny doses, always holding back the worst parts until I specifically asked about them. The game was designed to make me the villain for not being satisfied with partial honesty. That's when I stopped playing along. I told her I knew about the affair, I knew who she was seeing, and I knew she was lying about the extent of it. The look on her face when she realized her careful information management strategy had failed was almost worth the months of deception I'd endured. I thought I'd heard every lie until she dropped the bomb I never saw coming. When she finally started telling me the real story, something inside me completely broke down. The panic attack and cold water reality check. The physical reaction hit me like a freight train. The room started shrinking around me while my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. Suddenly, there were voices everywhere, even though only two people were talking. I recognized what was happening because I'd heard people describe panic attacks before, but experiencing one while your wife confesses to months of infidelity is a special kind of nightmare.